Okay, everybody, welcome back to the afternoon drive on Thursday, July 16th here at Gateway X. Bruce Wilson back in the host chair, taking you up to the round table at 5. Our next guest is probably known by pretty much anybody who was in the model railroad hobby. It's Otto Vondrak, and Otto is the editor of Railroad Model Crafts magazine. He's a lifelong model railroader residing in Rochester, New York. He's also an active railman and railway preservationist. His primary modeling interests are structure building and proto freelancing. And today he will focus on the long history of railroad model craftsman and its plans for the future. So, Otto, we'll pass it over to you and we'll get underway.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Bruce. Thanks everyone for having me here today. Very exciting to be here at the virtual convention, and I'm glad to be seeing you all here today virtually. And we're going to go into the history of Railroad Model Craftsman magazine, and also what we're looking forward to in the future. So let's get into it. As you may know, Railroad Model Craftsman is published by White River Productions. Our headquarters are outside the Kansas City, Missouri area, a town called Buckland, and that's where all of our warehousing and distribution comes out of. Our staff is actually scattered all around the country. We produce many of your favorite magazines, including Railfan and Railroad, Model Railroad News, Passenger Train Journal, Trains and Railroads of the Past, HO Collector Quarterly, O-Scale Trains Magazine, Narrow Gauge and Shortline Gazette, Railroads Illustrated, as well as other annuals and books and a lot of other your favorite publications too. But today we're talking about Railroad Model Craftsman, and going all the way back to the beginning, the magazine was actually known as simply The Model Craftsman. And it was a magazine that focused on home hobby craft because it was the height of the Depression and people were looking for things to do. And so Model Craftsman's first issue was March 1933. Here's what the cover of the first issue looked like. I also like to point out that we are a year older than that other magazine you may have heard of. And the focus was on home workshop and hobby craft topics because, like I said, it was the height of the Depression. People were looking for things they could do at home inexpensively, and this fit the bill. Magazine was founded by Emanuel Stieri, and he was a prolific how-to author of the 1930s and 40s. He produced many magazines and books about home hobby craft on a variety of topics, from model building to welding to woodworking, and so he was very prolific. So the company moved from Chicago to New York City in 1934, and the magazine was sold to Charles Penn in 1935, and he founded Penn Publications to produce the magazine each month. Harold Luce was one of the first editors. And in those days, the magazine continued to focus on a variety of hobby topics: boats, planes, steam engines, race cars, just about anything that was popular. 1940, the magazine moved across the river to Ramsey, New Jersey, because it's a lot cheaper to do business in the suburbs than it was to do it in New York City. For those of you not from the area, Ramsey's only about a 20-minute ride from New York City, so it wasn't very far. And the editor in those days was Robert Thompson. That's him working at his desk. Robert Thompson was the editor through the 1940s, and he was succeeded by his brother Jim Thompson in 1948. Here is what the offices in Ramsey, New Jersey looked like in 1942. It was a small house right off of busy Route 17. The building's not there anymore, but this is what it looked like in 1942. So the magazine continued to grow through the 1940s and started to tilt more towards trains and railroading. through the end of the 1940s. By 1948, you see the magazine is listed as 100% model railroading and also as the Pioneer Model Railroad magazine. So the editorial focus shifted exclusively to model railroading in 1948, and the name was changed to Model Railroad Craftsman in April 1949. This is the first issue of Model Railroad Craftsman. Just a couple months later, the name was formally changed to Railroad Model Craftsman 1949. It was actually a gentleman's agreement between Al Cambeck and Charles Penn. Cambeck's like, the name is just a little too similar to Model Railroader. Would you mind changing it? So they had a gentleman's agreement, and the name was changed to Railroad Model Craftsman in July 1949. Hal Karstens joined the staff in 1952. That's Hal all the way on the right-hand side of this photo. And Hal, being a New Jersey native and a lifelong railroader himself, he had been contributing articles to the magazine, and he joined the staff in 1952. 1955, we moved across town to an old telephone company building on Arch Street in Ramsey. This is a photo of the Arch Street office in 1955. Impressive looking building. And through the 1950s, the magazine continued to evolve. We start to see the modern Railroad Model Craftsman logo appear in the mid 50s and that familiar yellow block. The magazine eventually moved into the Ramsey Journal building in 1962. This was right downtown, right across from the train station. Some of you may remember the Ramsey Journal kit that you could get from AHM and later from Tyco. So you could have RMC headquarters right on your layout. The building is still there downtown, right there along the tracks. Used to be home to the local newspaper, and then RMC moved in there in 1962. So now we move into the Karstens Publications era. That's Hal Karstens at his desk. Charles Penn retired in 1962. Hal Karstens was named publisher, and he purchased the company from Charles Penn and renamed the company Karstens Publications in 1969. The magazine continued to grow through the 1960s, taking on that familiar look and feel you're also familiar with now. And we move into the modern era, as I call it. From left to right, this is a photo taken in 1978 when Karstens Publications had purchased the old Railroad magazine from Freeman Hubbard and merged it with Railfan. So on the left, you have Hal Karstens, the publisher. That's Freeman Hubbard standing next to him. That's Jim Boyd. Jim Boyd was actually working on Flying Models magazine, another magazine published by Karstens, was also doing work for Railroad Model Craftsman. And on the right, that's Tony Custer. Tony Custer joined the staff as associate editor in 1968 and was named managing editor in 1971. And that's around the time Tony was really responsible for changing the focus more towards prototype research and more accurate scale modeling. It's what I call the modern era of RMC. And I told you about his friend, his friend Jim Boyd. Jim, like I said, started with Flying Model magazine. He became editor of Railfan. He was the founding editor of Railfan in 1974. So after he took on Railfan, he didn't have as much time to work on RMC, so he kind of bowed out there for a while. Here's Hal Karstens standing outside the brand new headquarters building. This is when they moved up to Newton, New Jersey in 1973. It was a modern office and warehouse. And again, they moved up to northern New Jersey, again, just to save money. It's a lot cheaper to do business outside the big cities. And so they moved to the hills of northern New Jersey in 1973. Throughout the 1970s, the magazine continued to grow and evolve. In the late 1970s, we published the landmark V&O story series, all about Alan McKellen's proto-freelance Virginia and Ohio. And we later collected those articles into a book and reprinted it as the V&O story. And it was all about the design and development of this landmark proto-freelance layout that really set the tone for how we looked at model railroad design and operation into the 1980s. We do have a few copies of this book left. If you go to our bookstore at shop.whiteriverproductions.com, you can pick up a copy of this. We only have a few left in the warehouse, so if you feel so inclined, you can visit after the presentation. So throughout the 1980s, this is when Bill Schomburg joined the staff, and he became managing editor in 1981. And he was joined by Chris D'Amato and Jim Ankrum in 1982. And the same editorial team would be in place for the next 30 years. This was the longest serving editorial team we've had in the magazine's history. And the magazine, again, continued to grow and evolve under Schomburg's leadership. Who remembers the Gary Coleman cover? I think I remember seeing that when I was in high school, and I was so impressed by that. Hal Karstens passed away unexpectedly on June 23rd, 2009, and his son Henry took over the day-to-day operations of Karstens Publications. Karstens was first to market with digital edition magazines in 2011. We also built a brand new bookstore and all new websites for all of our magazines. So moving quickly into the digital age. Bill Schomburg retires in 2013. He's the longest serving editor of RMC. Chris D'Amato took over shortly after his retirement. And then unfortunately, Karstens Publications closed permanently on August 22nd, 2014. Fortunately, White River Productions purchased Railroad Model Craftsman and Railfin and Railroad beginning September 1st. Publisher is Kevin U. Daly, and White River Productions actually goes back to 1992 as a book and magazine publisher. Stephen Priest was named editor starting with the January 2015 issue. And Stephen was responsible for completely redesigning the magazine from top to bottom. So the magazine got its first facelift in about 30 years, which it desperately needed. Stephen Priest announced his departure in 2019, and they began a search for a new editor. Like I said, they were desperate, and there I was. So I was named new editor of Railroad Model Craftsman in February 2019. My first issue was the May 2019 issue, featuring Chris Brimley's Hudson Terminal end scale layout, which is an absolute gem if you've never seen it in person. So I made a few changes working with the staff. We restored the safety valve name to the letters column because that's the name the letters to the editor's column has always been called safety valve since the magazine began. So I brought that back. We reactivated the collector consist column to focus more on modern pioneering models. And that's authored by Tony Cook, who you may recognize as the editor of Model Railroad News and also the editor of HO Collector Quarterly. We also reactivated the company photographer column so that authors can share their updated modern techniques on how to photograph model railroad. I can't tell you how many times I'm working with potential authors and they're like, well, I'm no photographer and I can't do that. And, you know, quite frankly, I feel that photography is greatly simplified now that we have the digital age. And you can take great photos with a cell phone. You can take great photos with a DSLR. It's just a matter of setting them up properly, doing lighting, doing your focus points. And those are the things that we talk about in company photographers to help teach people how to become better photographers because I want you to take pictures of your layout and your models and send them to me so we can publish them. I also introduced a new painting and weathering column, and this rotates on a quarterly basis with the other columns. And again, it's about painting and weathering techniques, which I think is an important part of the hobby. So I don't do this alone. I can't do this alone. Our associate editor is Harry K. Wong. He is based out in the San Francisco Bay Area. I also work with Todd Gillette, our graphic designer. And I forgot to add him to this presentation, but Justin Franz is our newest associate editor. He joined us in April and he works with Harry and I to help develop stories for the magazine. So without this staff, we could not produce the magazine. It is definitely a team effort, and we work really hard to bring you the best in model railroading each month. So how is Railroad Model Craftsman different? Well, we provide a voice for active modelers, and we do that through featuring beautiful home and club layout tours. We focus on model railroad design. Kit bashing and scratch building is still the cornerstone of our magazine. Painting and weathering, especially as we have new materials and new um, techniques to deal with. And also, we love to cover conventions and railroad prototype modeler meets. That's very important. That kind of interaction and showcasing of models and ideas is a very important part of the magazine. How do you publish in Railroad Model Craftsman? First off, if you have an idea for a story, you contact me. You can get in touch with me through our Facebook page or through our website at rrmodelcraftsman.com, or contact information is published in each issue of the magazine. So you have an idea for a story, get in touch with me. We generally don't assign stories, so it's not like we're sitting around in our office thinking about topics we want to cover. We get the ideas for the topics to cover from you, the readers. So if you're not seeing an article about your favorite topic, you need to get in touch with me so we can develop a story together. Can't stress this enough. Almost all of our content comes from readers like you. So if there's a technique or a story or a topic that you want to see in the magazine, we need your help to bring it to us. We only work in electronic formats. So what does that mean? Feature stories are usually anywhere between 2,000 and 2,500 words, and we prefer that they're typed up in a program like Microsoft Word, um, or Apple Pages or some sort of word processing program, but it's got to be typed up for us. We can't deal with handwritten manuscripts. We only deal with digital photos. On rare occasions, we can use prints and slides if there's no digital copy available. It just slows down the process for us. I have a flatbed scanner here where I can deal with drawings and artwork and prints, like 8 by 10 prints, but slides kind of gums up the works. So just keep that in mind. Scale drawings, we love scale drawings. We prefer that they are submitted to us as a vector file, like a native CAD file or an EPS file, or you can send us a high resolution scan. How to write? I get this question all the time. I see a model I want to feature in the magazine. I reach out to the person. They're like, "Well, I'm no author, and I'm no photographer, and I can't do this." And it's like, you absolutely can do it. You can write. And the easiest way to do it is to make sure that your story has a beginning, middle, and an end. And I know that sounds really obvious, but this is the guidance I give to every author. You want to introduce what you're talking about. The middle part is how you produced it, and the end is you're wrapping up and you tie a little bow on it, and that is how you tell a story. It's as if you were telling it to your friend, how you built this model, how you built your layout. Your story has a beginning, middle, and end, so just follow that kind of formula. Don't assume we are familiar with your subject. So if you are writing about the Iowa Traction Railroad, and I have never been to Iowa and I've never been to the Iowa Traction, don't assume I know anything about it. If you are talking about a very specific type of anything, don't assume I know. Doesn't mean over explain, but definitely provide us with enough background so we know what we're looking at and why this topic is so captivating to you. Describe each step of your process as carefully as you can. So that means, again, you don't need to over explain. I cut here, I cut here, I cut here, but you definitely want to give the highlights of how you assembled your model. If there was any tips or tricks, like I got to this part of the process and I had to turn the whole model upside down in order to get to a certain part, those are things you want to tell us. You don't need to tell us about gluing every single part onto your model. And again, these are things that we develop with authors. We will help you develop the story. So if you think you're explaining too much, share it with us and we'll let you know. You know what? Too little, too much, we'll give you that feedback. That's what your editors are here for. Behind every great author is a great editor, and we're going to help make sure that your grammar, your grammar and spelling are fine, and we're going to guide you through every step of the process. Photographs. Photographs definitely make the story. For as much as I want to read and I want to understand what you're telling me, photographs are going to show me, they're going to reinforce your text. And I think this goes without saying, but sharp, well lit photos are required for publication. So that's okay. If you are taking photos in progress at your workbench, you don't necessarily need to take your model off the workbench and move it somewhere else to take a photo. As long as your background is relatively clean and it's well lit and your model is standing off from the background, that's fine. Um, if you are taking photos of your layout, we want them to be sharp, in focus, brightly lit. The finished, if you're working on a standalone model, photograph it on a plain background. Um, these are all things that we will guide you through if you're not familiar with the process. Today's cell phones, your iPhones, your Samsungs, they have great high resolution cameras in them. Don't be afraid to use them for your in progress photos. What I love about using a cell phone for an in progress photo, you can get really close up photos of details. So if you're doing a detailing project, this is a great way to snap a bunch of in progress photos as you go. When we visit someone's layout, what we really prefer are the ground level, realistic, almost rail fan type of photos. We want you to set up your layout as if you were rail fanning it, and we don't want to see any curtains in the background or mops and brooms or anything else in your layout room. So, you want to work with a friend, maybe hold up a bed sheet to hide certain areas that you don't want us to see, but strive for that ultra realistic ground level view. That's what we like with the layout tours. Because I think the whole thing about our model railroads, we're trying to build a realistic scene, much more realistic than the ground level view. Pulling back and showing us your layout room or showing us, some other large scene or maybe your railroads on two decks, I think that's fine. I think what we don't want to see is a bunch of what we call helicopter views where we're always looking down on your layout. I think we want to see the ground level as much as we can. Drawings and plans, like I said, we always love scale drawings. We prefer working with vector formats. That means like an Illustrator EPS or a PDF. We can work with certain native CAD files as well. If you are doing scale drawings by hand, like on a big draftsman board, we'll also take a high resolution scan of a very large drawing. We can work with that as well. If we're doing a layout tour, we definitely want a layout track plan to go along with the story. And It can be a sketch that shows the basic track layout. It can be something more detailed and to scale, whatever it is, just give us something to work with so that we can trace it and get it into the magazine. The level of detail is up to you. We like to include principal features like scenery and structures. Like if you're crossing a river, show the river. If there's an industry served by the railroad, show the industry. Make sure that you call out towns and industries and interlockings and things like that. Here's the important part everyone always asks me: payment and compensation. So, when your story is accepted for publication, we'll send you a release form. So, a lot of times people will send their story, we review it, looks great, we'll hold on to it. Right now, we are currently scheduling out magazines as far as February 2021. So, I am booked solid through this coming February, which means we're probably going to be holding on to stories for a while at this point if you submit something. And we will let you know as soon as it's scheduled for publication. And when it's scheduled, that means we've accepted it. That means you can't shop it around anywhere else. Now, if you change your mind and you want to pull it out, that's fine. You just got to let us know that. But once we accept it for publication, we'll send you a release form. And the release form outlines how we're going to pay you or compensate you. And compensation usually follows net 60 days from the publication date. That means once the magazine is printed and it shows up in our warehouse, that's when the clock ticks. That's when the clock starts ticking for us to get you your payment and compensation. A lot of people ask what the release form is all about. So, more or less, it's one time usage by White River Productions. You retain the rights to your material. So, what that means is we're paying you for this story. You can't take the exact same story and run it somewhere else and get paid. Um, you can write a different story and use different photos and talk about the same topic, but you can't take the same story and shop it to 10 different magazines and expect to get paid for it 10 times. That's a no no. And that will get you blacklisted. We've had people do that, and it's very rare, and you just can't get paid twice for the same work. It's just not something that happens in this industry. And yes, we do talk to each other. I talk to our friends at Model Railroader all the time to make sure that we're not overlapping. So we do know. So don't try to sneak one past us. So this is really important. I can't stress this enough, especially in this day and age. Support your local hobby shop. Support your local hobby shop like crazy. Um, Also, you can ask your local hobby shop to carry Railroad Model Craftsman and other White River titles. I think that'd be a great idea because you can tell your hobby shop owner that you will come in and your friends will come in each month just to buy a magazine, and they'll probably come in and buy something else while they're visiting as well. So, yes, ask your friends to carry Railroad Model Craftsman. Shameless plug. You can also subscribe. Um, we love subscribers. If your local dealer won't carry us, please consider a subscription. Keeps me off the streets. Appreciate your support. So I don't know if you've heard that the hobby is dying. I know this is a shock to me too. I hear this quite often. People tell me left and right that the hobby is dying. So I thought I'd bring this up and let you know in case you folks haven't heard, the hobby is dying. Actually, that's not true at all. The hobby is growing and it's growing like crazy. And these are the ways it's growing. First of all, right now in 2020, we have greater access to information than we ever had in our lives between the internet, Facebook groups, being able to find and connect with other experts. We have so much access to prototype information. It's crazy. What does that mean? What do we do with all that information? That means more manufacturers are offering more models. Do you remember just 20, 30 years ago, there was one 40-foot boxcar on the market and it was painted for 30 different railroads and that was it. And if you wanted a 40-foot boxcar for your railroad, you either had to modify that one car, maybe you got a resin craftsman kit, or you somehow made do. Well, today, because we have access to all this information, There are now more manufacturers offering more models than ever before. Also, with all this information, you have new niche interest groups forming. You have groups like OPSIG, the Operation Special Interest Group. I know there's a special interest group all about waterfront operations and marine operations and car floats. Um, Niche groups about narrow gauge and logging railroads and mining railroads, industrial railroads. If there's a niche, there's probably a special interest group out there focused on it. Again, with all this information, we're seeing a renewed interest in prototype modeling. Why are we seeing all these RPM meets pop up around the country, railroad prototype modelers? It's fascinating seeing that kind of growth. So, how can you support the hobby and keep it from dying? You can join a model railroad club. You can join your local NMRA division. You can join a special interest group. It's a great way to meet other people. It's a great way to connect with other modelers. It's also another great way to share and get access to information. Say it again, support your local hobby shop. I will stand on the rooftops and scream it, support your local hobby shop in any way that you can. Buy gift certificates, buy from their online store, go to their store in person if you're able to, order merchandise through them, whatever it is. Support your local hobby shop, help them grow. Encourage younger modelers. Now, this is a tough one. Um, there are plenty of young modelers out there, and you might not see them because they are not hanging out in the same places we are. Your younger modelers are hanging out with their friends. They're online, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook. They are sharing their work and getting to know people on in much different ways than we did. I remember when I was a kid growing up, I think I was 8 years old or 9 years old before I even realized other people liked trains, let alone that there was even a hobby about this. So it took forever for me to meet other people, join clubs, learn about the hobby. Today, young people have access to all the same information we do. They want to learn. And I remember my first attempts at modeling were not so great. I didn't have anyone to work with to encourage me, to mentor me. And the best way you can encourage a younger modeler, even if they completely mess up their first attempt, you know what you say to them? You say, keep going. Don't stop now. Keep going. Um, don't tell them they messed up. Just tell them to keep at it. And if they keep at it, they'll start developing their skills. If you tell them they messed up and start coming down on them, you're going to discourage them right out of this hobby. So you meet a young person, you say, keep going. That's how you encourage younger modelers. Publish your work and share it with others, whether you publish it here at Railroad Model Craftsman, whether you write a blog, whether you share your work on a Facebook group, however you share, publish your work and share it with others. People want to learn from you. Share information with manufacturers. This is also super important. If you want to see accurate models built, and if you've been researching the perfect 40-foot boxcar for your particular favorite railroad your whole life, share that information. That's how accurate models get built. Oh, and also the best way to support the hobby is to have fun. Definitely have fun while you're doing this. I just want to wrap up by sharing some modeling I've been involved with over the years. This is a scene from the old RIT Model Railroad Club when I was a student at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I helped start the Model Railroad Club there. And this is a scene from downtown Rochester modeled after the High Falls waterfall. Our home road was the Rochester and Irondequoit Terminal, the Genesee route. And you see the Genesee route switchers pulling a coal train across the lower trestle while a CSX train is up on the main line. So this layout has since been torn down and a larger one is being built in its place. So this photo is about 20 years old, 15 years old. It's almost old enough to drive. Here's another scene from the Rochester and Rondequoit terminal. You may remember we featured the RNIT in a recent issue of Railroad Model Craftsman. In the May issue, we did a design clinic comparing the old layout with the new layout. So here's a brace of 4 Alcos leading a heavy coal drag through downtown Rochester. One of my favorite scenes on the old layout, this is a highway in Rochester called the Inner Loop, and we're looking down on the Amtrak station across over to the High Falls, see a Conrail train heading over the falls. Clearly it's rush hour on the Inner Loop and drivers are getting cut off here. It's very prototypical if you know Rochester. Another scene we had on the old layout was a model of the old Rochester subway. Rochester subway was a rapid transit trolley route that was built in the bed of the old Erie Canal. Ran from 1927 until 1956. So this was a scene that was modeled after the subway. This is a subway station I scratch built. I did a quick kit bash of a Bachmann trolley for a subway car. And then you see New York Central on the upper level. So this was a fun scene on the old layout. And yes, in the 1950s, the right-of-way was heavily overgrown, and I modeled this using fake fur. This was a later scene after the subway quit passenger service. It was still being used for freight. So you see abandoned track on the left, the old subway station, and RNIT local coming through the abandoned station on the old layout. Here's some updated work. You probably remember our Consider the Commuter series that we ran between 2018 and 2019. We built a series of modules to create a commuter railroad, and the modules I built were called Flagstone. This is the end of the line. Flagstone was supposed to be a generic suburban scene, and I demonstrated just by changing out the equipment and some of the signs, you can model a variety of eras and railroads. So these are FL9s and coaches produced by Rapido Trains. We have Woodland Scenic's mansard roof house, um, bungalow house from Atlas, the Atlas station. This was photographed on the modules. I brought them outdoors to the park across the street from my apartment. It's a lot of fun to photograph the trains outdoors in natural light. Here's another scene on the modules with New York Central RDC passing New York Central boxcar being unloaded at the lumber yard. The RDC is a model by Rapido, and the boxcar is a model from, that's a KD model, KD boxcar. Again, HO scale models photographed outside. For the article, I also lightly kit bashed, modified an old AHM E8 to represent the equipment that Erie Lackawanna and later Conrail was using on a commuter train that ran between Youngstown and Cleveland. And this train ran until 1977. So I modified the AHM unit by removing the second headlight, painting over it, making the patch out, putting on custom decals for the Conrail patch. And I photographed this outdoors. And the headlight, I cheated. The headlight is photoshopped in. I apologize. Otherwise, everything here is just as you see it. So for some cheap AHM models, that I picked up for $100, it wasn't too bad. Not a bad representation of a specific train. And I think I have one more. That might be the end for now. I end. I want to thank everyone for having me here today. Glad sorry we can, but I'm glad we had this opportunity to chat. I'm glad we got to talk a little bit about from you.